Hello, today I'm reviewing the SkyOne Lite, which is the latest mid-tower case from Montech. As you can see, the case features an all-mesh front panel with an ARGB lighting bar. It's got a front panel Type-C connector and comes with 3 included case fans. And all that for the very low price of $69.99 US. So it's a case that promises an awful lot. We'll see if it delivers later in the video. The tempered glass side panel is actually a door, and it can be opened by pulling the handle at the front. To remove the panel completely, it simply needs to be lifted up and away. To remove the other side panel, you simply need to loosen the captive thumb screws at the back. The panel then can be slid backwards and lifted away. Taking a look at the front I/O, we've got a power and reset button. We've then got a button to control the LED lighting effects on the case's front panel. We've got a separate headphone and microphone jack. We've got 2 USB 3.0 Type A ports and a single USB Type-C port. On the top of the case, we've got a mesh dust filter which is magnetically attached and can simply be pulled away. On the bottom of the case, we've got another dust filter, and given the case's price point, it's really impressive to see that this is a tray style filter, as most case manufacturers in this price point would cheap out by just including a sheet of mesh. Taking a look at the case's front panel, you can see we've got a large mesh panel with an ARGB lighting bar at the front. To remove the front panel, all you simply need to do is pull it away from the front. With the panel removed, you can see we've got 2 high airflow non-RGB fans pre-installed at the front. If you take a closer look down at the bottom right hand side, you'll notice we've got 3 pins, and this is how you're able to remove the front panel without there being any wires. We've got metal contacts on the front panel, which when it makes contacts with the pins allows you to control the RGB lighting bar on the front panel. Take a look at the back of the front panel, you'll notice there's no dust filters, so Montech are going with all mesh at the front. However, one thing to point out at this stage is the RGB lighting bar does take up a large portion of that front panel. Whether that impacts on airflow or not, you'll have to stick to the end of the video to see. Moving into the main body of the case, the SkyOne Lite is compatible with up to full-sized ATX motherboards, although you can of course install a micro ATX or mini ATX motherboard should you prefer. You'll notice we've got another 120mm non-RGB fan installed at the rear of the case. As well, we've got 2 fan mounting locations at the top of the case where you can mount either 120 or 140mm fans. At the bottom of the case above the power supply shroud, there's also space for 2 120mm fans. And although we've got 2 120mm fans pre-installed at the front, you can mount up to 3 120 or 3 140mm fans. In terms of radiator support, at the front it's up to a 360 or 280mm radiator. At the top it's up to 240 or 280mm radiator, while at the rear it's up to a 120mm radiator. If you prefer to go with an air cooler, you'll be pleased to hear you can fit pretty large air coolers in this case, up to a maximum height of 170mm. At the rear of the case we've got 7 horizontal PCIe expansion slot covers, and it's great to see that even given this case's budget price point, these are the proper slot covers that you can take out and put back in again, and not the breakaway type. You're not going to have any problem fitting a large graphics card in this case, with graphics cards up to a maximum length of 350mm being supported. Before we leave the main body of the case, you'll notice that we've got 2 2.5-inch drive mounting locations over to the right hand side. Moving into the rear compartment, and 2 things I wasn't expecting in a case of this price point is Velcro cable straps, and importantly these are of a good colour so they're not going to show through at the front of the case. And the other thing was rubber grommets over to the 2 main cutouts to the right hand side of the motherboard. All the rest of the cutouts look to be in sensible locations, and we've got plenty of cable tie down points. The power supply is going to go down at the bottom, and the SkyOne Lite supports full-sized ATX power supplies up to a maximum length of 180mm with the hard drive cage installed, or up to 200mm with the hard drive cage removed. We've got 2 dedicated 2.5-inch drive mounting brackets over to the bottom right hand side. They're held on with captive thumb screws. Once this has been loosened, the bracket can simply be lifted away. At the bottom of the case we've got a hard drive cage which has 1 drive tray in it. In the drive tray you can fit either a 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch drive. As well as this, you can also mount an additional 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch drive on the top of the hard drive cage. To mount the drive here, you're going to have to remove the hard drive cage, install the drive and then reinsert it. Removing the hard drive cage is really straightforward. There's 2 screws at the bottom you need to remove, and then the hard drive cage can simply be slid forward and lifted away. With the hard drive cage removed, you can see we've got a much larger space for our power supply and associated cables. Taking a look at the case accessory box, and we need to give Montech more credit here because the screws are individually packaged and labelled. They include a standoff tool for removing and replacing the standoffs, and we've got more Velcro cable straps. What I want to do now is give you a look at the build I've put together in the Sky One Lite. So I think you'll agree the build looks great, but what about the temperatures? So our i7-12700K was being cooled by the Darkrock Pro 4, and it idled at 32 degrees and reached a maximum of 92 degrees during a 10-minute IDA64 stability test. Our ROG Strix RTX 3080 idled at 34 degrees and reached a maximum of 70 degrees during the IDA64 stability test. Noise levels were, however, a little bit higher than I would have liked, given the fact that we're using an incredibly quiet CPU cooler and GPU. At idle, we had an average noise level of 39 decibels, while during the IDA64 stability test it reached an average noise of 51 decibels. To put those results in context, I used exactly the same CPU, cooler, motherboard and GPU in the Fractal Torrent Compact. In that build, there wasn't really a big difference in temperatures. Our CPU idled 2 degrees cooler, and the GPU was 1 degree cooler at idle and 2 degrees cooler under load. Noise levels were a whopping 8 decibels less under full load. So putting all that together, I am impressed with the temperatures, but in terms of the noise levels, particularly under full load, it is a little bit noisier than what I would like. Now what I have done is I've got 3 Montech fans at the front, and I have stopped those in turn and then stopped the Gelid fans as I've installed for the rest of the build. And it actually does seem to be the Montech fans which are contributing to the high noise levels. What you could do if you wanted to bring that down a bit further is, of course, you could go into the fan curves and modify them so they're not spinning up so much, although I would expect the temperatures to increase, particularly given these fans at the front are the main source of air intake for both the GPU and the CPU. The next thing I want to look at was how restrictive is our front panel. Remember at the start I pointed out that a large portion of the front panel is actually solid to facilitate having an ARGB lighting bar on it. So what I did, I ran exactly the same tests without the front panel installed. So taking a look at the temperatures without the front panel, our CPU idled 1 degree cooler and was 3 degrees cooler during the IDA64 stability test. Our GPU was also 2 degrees cooler at idle and 1 degree cooler under load. In terms of noise levels, removing the front panel was associated with a 2 decibel reduction in noise levels at idle. So putting those results into context, what I have found with my previous testing is that with a really good mesh panel, you would expect the temperatures to come down by about 1 degree by removing it. And in some really restrictive panels that I've had in the past, you're maybe going to come down by about 8 or 9 degrees. So the fact that we're in the 2 to 3 degree range is still pretty good. And in fact, had this mesh panel been completely mesh rather than been a large part of solid at the front, that's probably the 1 degree would be what I would be expecting with it. But everything's a balance. I think having the RGB lighting bar effect on the front looks pretty good, but it's going to cost you maybe about 1 degree in terms of temperatures versus having a complete mesh panel on the front, which isn't too bad. So the next thing I wanted to look at was whether having the 2 fans installed as intake below the GPU actually made any difference. When I was installing them, I didn't think it was going to make any difference to the temperatures, given that the power supply and then the power supply's cables were going to be taking up most of the space beneath the fans. So taking a look at the temperatures without the bottom fans, our CPU idled 1 degree hotter, while it was 1 degree cooler under load. Taking a look at the GPU temperatures, our idle temperatures actually came down by 2 degrees without the bottom fans, while there was no difference to the temperatures under load. Not having the 2 bottom fans was associated with less noise by 1 decibel at idle and 2 decibels under load. So in terms of temperatures, having 2 fans beneath the GPU makes absolutely no difference. It's going to cost you more money to do it, And I suppose the only advantage of doing it is the aesthetics. And I do think these gel-led fans actually look really good. But that benefit in terms of aesthetics is going to have to be offset against the extra noise and the extra cost of putting the fans there. Also as well, the fact that Montech don't include the fan mounting screws, so you're going to have to pick up extra fan mounting screws again at extra cost and extra hassle in terms of finding them. So my advice is probably to leave the fan mounting locations at the bottom empty. So this brings me on to my experience of building in the Sky One Lite, and I can say it was a really pleasant building experience. And in fact, I didn't run into any issues at all during the build. I was expecting to. I did use a full set of cable extensions, including two 8-pin EPS cable extensions running up to the top left-hand side of the motherboard. And normally that can be quite tricky in a case that doesn't have a lot of space for cable management at the back. But at the end of this build, I had absolutely no trouble getting the side panel back on again, which is really impressive given this case's size. Cable management at the back was really good in terms of using the Velcro cable straps, and we have plenty of cable ties included in the accessory bag as well. The little cutout that you had at the bottom right hand side in the power supply shroud for bringing the PCIe cables straight up to the GPU worked really well, and that again helped. The fact that the rest of the cables were staying down the bottom in the power supply compartment and not having to run up the back of the case. Although I had no trouble at all with the 24-pin cable extension and getting the side panel back on again at the end. I think a large reason that we weren't able to see any of the cables was the fact that I had gone with bottom mounted fans. Because before I had installed the fan, you could look straight through and see the power supply, particularly given the power supply had a lot of yellow in it. And then again, next to that, I think you would have been able to see all the cables as well. So that's maybe one advantage of having the fans at the bottom, in that it's going to help hide your power supply and cables. But a really pleasant building experience in the Sky One Lite. So this brings me on to the things I liked about the Sky One Lite, and there is actually an awful lot, so much so that I had to make a list. The first thing I want to say about it is, for a case costing $69.99, the build quality really is exceptional and exceeded my expectations. I wasn't expecting a tempered glass door that would swing out, and on the other side panel, the fact that you've got captive thumb screws isn't always something you would expect in a case of this price point. The RGB lighting bar on the front looks great. We've got some built-in effects which are again also very good, and the fact that the front panel comes off without any connecting wires again isn't always something you would expect in this price point. We've got 3 included case fans, albeit they don't have any ARGB on it and they are a little bit noisy, but if you're going for a budget build and you're going to modify the fan curves, they'll do perfectly well for that. And again, because you've got an ARGB lighting bar on the front, you're going to get a little bit of light in the build, even though you're not necessarily going to have to use fans that have ARGB on it. There was also a lot of touches that I wasn't expecting in a case of this price point. The fact that we've got a full-sized tray filter at the bottom, whereas most cases in this price point would just include a sheet of mesh that's really, really awkward to remove. We've also got 2 rubber grommets. Again, most of the cutouts didn't have grommets on them, but the 2 major ones did. The fact that the covers, the PCI expansion slot covers, are the proper ones that you can take out and put in, not the ones that you're going to have to break out, which quite often you get in cases in this price point. The front panel cables, the fact that they are all combined into a single header for you, rather than have to plug in the individual cables, really nice touch. And also the fact that we've got Velcro cable straps. And importantly, they're not in a nasty color like you get in a lot of other budget cases. So when you actually look through the front, you can see the horrible color. They blend in really well with the color of this case. Moving into the accessory box, again, there was a lot of things there that really impressed me. The fact that the screws came individually packaged and labeled, and the fact that we've actually got the standoff removal tool was really, really good. And the other thing I really liked was this cutout for the PCIe cables at the front of the power supply shroud, rather than having to bring them through one of the cutouts at the back. I just felt it made the cables look so much better. So you can see why I made a list. There was no way I was going to remember all of that. So this brings me on to the things I didn't like about the case, And I had to actually think a little bit harder about this, and the fact I am nitpicking a little bit, which is a good sign of just how good this case actually is. So some of the things I didn't like, Montech had done an absolutely brilliant job of thinking about everything, individually packaged screws, the standoff removal tool, but the one thing they left out was the 8 screws to mount 2 fans at the bottom of the case. I think from my testing it shows that they're probably not going to add that much of a difference, but I think if you put holes in the case you should include the screws to mount them as well. One of the other things I didn't like was the colour of some of the cables. I thought it was great that Montech grouped all the front panel connectors into a single header, but why did they have to have the outside of it as green? Again, if I didn't have fans at the bottom of the case, that green cable is going to be fully on display. Likewise, with the triple splitter cable for the 3 included fans, I don't know why the end of it had to be white rather than black. And black for both of those cables would have helped it just blend in better to most builds. In terms of the fans, again, I'm picking at small points here. They were a little bit noisier than what I would have liked, but of course I can go into the fan curves and bring the speed down and save a little bit on that noise. The only other tip that I would have for improving it, and something that other cases have done, is having the little cutout you've got right at the front. They will put a little cover over that so you can't see the cables at the bottom if you're just going to go with fans at the front. And if you want to go with the radiator, then you can remove the cutout and install the radiator. And that would be the only tips I would give Montech for improvement on the next version of the case. So now we've reached the point in this review where I need to sum up and tell you if you should go out and get this case. So at only $69.99, picking up this case is a complete no-brainer. The build quality and the features it has are well above its price point, and this is without doubt the best Montech case that I have seen or had the pleasure to build in. It's really, really good, and I think if you're looking for a budget case, you'll find it hard to do better than this one. So hopefully you have found this video useful. If you have, please remember to give it a thumbs up, and if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.